roll down my window a little bit. Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. So, yeah, she killed her husband. So I thought, why not make another story time? I miss horses terribly. I have my current horse. We're in the process of selling him or leasing him out. But I can't ride him because he's way too much horse for me. But I have horses on the brain. I miss horses so much. So I was thinking about my other horse that died. And I was thinking about the story time that I always wanted to make but didn't make because that was a whole shitstorm. So, gonna tell you about the time that my other horse before this one, Teak, was held for ransom, pretty much by definition. I bought Teak when I was 18 and my parents never paid for anything. I worked my ass off to make that dream work. I paid for everything myself. It was my horse, it was my responsibility, and I was happy to do it. And I worked, at the time I worked part-time and I was going to school. So I could afford a horse, but like barely. Still living at home, so I didn't have to pay rent or anything like that, and that's why. So it came down to it. I had had him for about 2-3 years at this point, and then my mom had always been on my case about, you know, if you didn't have a horse, then you could live on your own, and you could do this, and you could do that, and you could be more independent, whatever. So it came down to it. I don't remember what officially made me decide, but I decided that I was going to lease him out because I wasn't going to sell him over my dead fucking body. I was going to lease him out, and for those who don't know, a lease, there's different types of leases, and the lease that I was going for was what they call a full care lease, where basically you give your horse to someone and they pay for it completely as if the horse belongs to them in return for being able to use it. So I gave him to someone and they paid for him. They paid for all of his care, anything he needed, as if they owned him, but I still legally owned him. So at any point in time I could take him back. Or, you know, they could also say, you know, instead of committing to buying a horse, they could say, this is fun, this is dandy. If, you know, if they outgrew him or, you know, whatever reason, they could give him back or I could take him back. I planned to lease him out and focus on school and moving out and adult things, whatever. I don't remember how I stumbled upon these people, these swamp creatures, but I did. I think either I had seen that they were looking for a horse for lease or they had seen that I had posted my horse for lease. Either way, we got in contact. So I'm talking to the barn owner and she's asking me to tell her a little bit about Teak, which I did. She told me that she was looking for one of her clients, I guess, but they were looking for a horse for the daughter. Great, fine, dandy. I sent him videos, I sent him pictures, I tell them about Teak. They really like him, which it was hard not to do. He was like a big puppy dog. And we scheduled time for them to come meet, and they live about 1.5 to 2 hours away, where Teak was at the time. So the mom and the daughter, let's see, we'll call the daughter Abby. And the mom, we'll call her Christine. Sure, Christine and Abby. I believe I got in contact with Christine and was like, here's where we are, here's a date and time, come meet them. And I'm pretty chill, so I'm like, you tell me when and I'm there, basically. You can ride them, you can groom them, you can do whatever you want, because, you know, you gotta really get to know the horse. They drive down, and me and my sister go to meet them there, and signal at our barn was a little shoddy. So we sent them a text message to let them know we were a few minutes out. They said, fine, we're already here. I said, awesome, great, we'll be there in like 2 minutes. 2 seconds, like 2 seconds. We'll be there lickety-split. It was a private barn, a small private barn, so it's not like there's different cars coming and going all the time. We pretty much know what car belongs to who. So we get there, and there's a car there, we being my sister and I don't know if I said that. There's a car we don't recognize. It's them. Great. It's a small barn. There's like 9 stalls. It's a small barn. We walk in through the front barn door, and we don't see anybody. And I look, and Teak's stall door is open. We walk up to it, and there, Christine and Abby are in his stall and like have a halter on him, have him tied up, and they're brushing him. Which, I'm a pretty chill person. If they had asked ahead of time, I would have been like, hell yeah, these are my brushes, go ahead, let yourselves in, and hang out with him. But like, I had never met these people. They don't know my horse. I'm honest, and I was honest, and I told them, you know, Teak is a wonderful horse, he's super sweet. What if I had been lying all along, trying to pull a fast one on them, you know? Like, you don't just let yourself into a random horse's stall, number one, that you don't have permission to be in. Even if you do know me, and even if you are there to see him, you don't just let yourself in, and you don't just start handling a horse that you don't know. And you don't have permission to touch. Like, what if I was like, I don't trust anybody around my horse? Like, I've known a couple people that you were not allowed in their horse's stall. They didn't want you anywhere near their horse. They were the only ones allowed to touch their horse. And a lot of people are like that. So that was weird. They had just like let themselves in, and I'm like, oh, are you Christine and Abby? And they tied my horse up. Like, which is fine and dandy, but what if my horse doesn't stand tied well? Or what if he doesn't like to stand tied in a stall? There's just so much you don't know, and you're putting yourself at danger. Because what if he freaked out and like trampled both of them? Then I'm in trouble, and me and the barn owner, you know, we get sued because they just like helped themselves to my fucking horse. But it bugged me, and it was weird. And everybody I tell, they're like, that's fucking weird, like, don't touch my horse. And I'm like, I know, right? Anyway, I let them basically have free rein so they could get to know him and, you know, see what he's like when they cinch him up and that kind of thing, when they put a saddle on him, when they bridle him, how he picks up his feet, you know, the whole 9 yards. I just kind of let them do whatever they were going to do, and I just kind of watched. And then they're like, you hop on first, we'll watch you ride, and then we'll have Abby hop on and she can go for it. I took him around a few laps, showed him off. She hopped on, and she was riding him. She rode fine. I had, my trainer happened to be there, so my trainer, I was like, hey, can I kind of like, if you want, I can give you money for it, otherwise can you kind of like stick around and help me out here? So the trainer kind of gave like a mini lesson. She really liked him. So, and Christine was asking me the whole time just questions about him, and, you know, like, why are you looking to lease him out? And I let her, as well as the barn owner who set up this whole play date, know that I am not looking to sell. I'm not going to sell him any day soon. But, you know, I support this habit completely on my own, and it's coming time to start doing more adult things. So I'm looking to lease him out so I can go to college. You know, I was already going, but I could like commit more to school and work less if I needed to, you know, not that money was an issue, because I made it work and I made it happen. But I was early 20s, still am, but like early 20s. So like I made a minimum wage. I worked a part-time job, you know, so money it wasn't as free flowing, but I could afford a horse. I let him know that. Abby loved him. We discussed further detail about him. The trainer, you know, mentioned some things about him just as from, because she's put in some training rides on him. So I was like, from a trainer standpoint, what's he like? Because I know my horse, but we never did anything like fun and exciting. We just like, I rode for fun. It wasn't like we showed, we didn't do anything serious. I rode for fun. And then they went on their merry way. So all in all, they decided to go ahead and lease him. So he was going to move to their barn over 2 hours away, which is fine. That's what I knew. It's really hard to find someone who wants to do an in-barn lease. I had tried many times, and it just to no avail. Nobody wants to do it. Everybody wants to take their horse, or the horse, elsewhere, which is fine. I understand. We all chatted. We all decided, great, come and get him. There was like this little horse camp or something that their barn owner was doing. So they're like, hey, is there any way we could take him like the last week of August, the second to last week of August, and we'll just reimburse you for the board that you already paid, instead of taking him September 1st and, you know, just going from there. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So they came, they got him, I cried, and like this whole time, my gut instinct is screaming at me not to do this, and that something's wrong, something's up, it doesn't feel right. And I didn't know if it was because I just didn't want to give my horse up, or if it was just because it was wrong. Like, it felt so wrong. So they come take him. I cried like a baby. We did up a contract saying this, that, and the other thing, you know, like, you can't do any medical procedures unless it is life-threatening. You can't do any medical procedures without running them by me. I want to know when you're leaving the premises, where you're going, how long you're going to be there, and if you are going to take him to shows, you need to vaccinate him. We had a 6-month agreement, so from this date to that date, and that they're going to assume full responsibility, that kind of thing, that he can't leave the premises without me knowing about it. He can't leave the state whatsoever. Just that kind of thing. You know, the rule book, basically. We signed that. He went off 2 hours away. All was fine and dandy for the first couple weeks. The girl was young. She was, I think she was like 13 or something. 12, 13. She had an Instagram. She followed me on Instagram. Her mom followed me on Instagram because Teak had his own Instagram account. And she would constantly send me updates on him, you know, about she loves him so much, and today they did this and this and that, the other thing. Where it started to get dicey. First, the barn owner, she messaged me at one point and was like, hey, how's Lily doing? How's your sister's horse doing? Which was weird. And I was like, she's fine? Why? Like, what? She's fine. Don't worry about it. And she was like, well, if you guys need any help with anything, any financial help, don't be afraid to reach out to us. We're here to help, like, if you ever need anything at all. Which I thought was nice, but weird. Like, really nice. Really, really, really nice. But it just didn't sit right with me. And I was like, that's a little super, super kind of you, but, like, we don't know you like that. We're not just gonna borrow money or anything like that from someone we really don't know. Then, there was a few times I wanted to come. I think I went out twice to see him. I think I went out a week after he'd gotten there. Because the barn owner was like, give him a week to settle in. Fine, just to check in and see how he was doing. And then from then on out, to try to schedule to see him was like pulling teeth. I had to talk to the barn owner every time. I couldn't talk to Christine, who was the one who signed the papers, you know, who was actually leasing him. I had to talk to the barn owner, which I kind of understand, but that's still a little weird. Like, this is an A and B conversation, like, see your way out of it kind of thing. Like, you're not, yeah, he's at your barn, but I didn't sign a contract with you. Like, you're not part of this, really. Like, you're... And it was like pulling teeth. I respect it was her property. So I would ask, can I come see him on this day? No. Okay. But she informed me that I could not come see him unless someone was not only home, but someone was home and free to watch my every move. Yeah, so she said, per her barn insurance, whoever was in the barn had to be supervised 100% of the time. Which makes a little bit of sense because everybody who was in her barn, Teak was the only horse in her barn that didn't actually belong to her. So that makes a little bit of sense because she ran this like little like riding program or something fucking stupid out of her barn. So that makes sense when anybody coming into your barn is like 13 years old at the max. But I was like, I'm 22, 21, 22. It's my fucking horse. I don't need to be babysat. There was a good chunk of time too where she wouldn't let me come see Teak because she had heard once about a person who knew a person who knew a person who knew a guy who knew a guy who had an uncle who had a fish that knew a guy that leased out a horse. This lessor, was riding a horse in a show. The owner showed up, was standing on the sidelines. The horse saw the owner, threw the rider into a fence, almost killed her, and ran to the owner. Which, yeah, that's fucking dangerous, but I don't know a single goddamn horse that would do that. Especially Teak. Yeah, you don't know my horse that well, but I do, number one, and number two, you knew him well enough to let yourself into the fucking stall without supervision. Yeah, so she was like, I don't want you coming to see your horse. At one point she told me, he is Abby's horse now. You agreed, you signed the papers, this was your decision. He is Abby's horse now, so she is the only one that's going to be around him. She is the only one who's going to ride him. And he's going to bond with her. Like, we're not going to have you coming in and, like, screwing it up for her. And I was like, what the fuck? That's my legal property. Like, legally, that is my property. Like, his registered papers saying that I am his legal owner. Like, this horse belongs to me. APHA papers say owner, my name. That is my fucking horse. I was like, okay, I understand. You're right. I wasn't going to argue it, but I was like, it's not like I was asking to come see him every 5 seconds. It's not like I was asking to come ride him. I saw him twice in the 6 months that he was gone, and I absolutely respected their space. She went to a handful of shows in the time that she had him, and I was able to come to one of them, but the majority of them, they didn't want me to come because they didn't want Teak to see me and not perform his best. Like, if Teek's not going to perform his best, it's because he's not going to perform his best. It's not because he sees me standing on the sidelines. But again, I was like, I respect that. That's fine, whatever. They constantly took pictures of Teek, and the daughter was constantly sending them to me. I noticed in pictures he started to look horrible. Like, when he was with me, he was a little bit on the chunkier side, but I prefer my horses to have a little more weight than too little weight. He was well muscled. He looked good. Like, he looked really good. But I noticed he was starting to look bad. He was skinny, he was scrawny, his muscles were... The way you properly ride a horse, it should look like a rainbow, not a smile. So if you constantly ride your horse in a hollow frame, they start to develop the wrong muscles. So they develop the muscles on the underside of the neck instead of the top of the neck. The muscles on their back, since their back is hollow, start to wither, because you want them to lift and engage, but when they're running around like this. So I noticed that started happening. And there were a few times that Abby was like, oh yeah, I just rode Teek for 2 hours. So that, on top of how skinny he was getting, my thinking is, you're doing too much. Oh, and then at one point, they called me. While I was at work, I stepped away and they're like, hey, there's something wrong with Teek. And I was like, fuck, here we go. So they're like, there's something wrong with Teek, and just so you know, we went ahead and did injections into his hocks. No, nobody asked me. Nobody called me to let me know that this was going on ahead of time. They just called me saying, hey, the vet's here and they just did hock injections and we paid for them, so don't worry about it. I didn't give permission. Like, hock injections, it's not like a vaccine. It's not something simple. Like, it's kind of a big deal, and it's a big medical thing that shouldn't have been done because they didn't have my permission. Because, like, once you start them, you can't stop. So, and it wasn't like, hey, the vet came out and was thinking about hock injections. What do you think? We'll pay for them. Don't worry about it. But, you know, it was just the vet just did them and we paid for them. So that'll help. Nobody asked me. Like, that right there broke the contract. But I figured he was going to be with him for a long time. So I was like, all right, whatever. That's fine. No worries. I finally got to come to a show. They're like, you can come, but don't let Abby see you. And don't let Teek see you. Once all their classes are done, they're like, okay, now you may be seen. Now you may let your presence be known. So they were trotting down the long side. And I poked my head in, and he saw me, and his whole face lit up, and he was so happy to see me, and it was heartwarming. Shocker, he didn't throw her into a fence. Weird. The weight issue came up. I tried to bring it up as nicely as possible. I tried not to accuse him of anything, but I was like, hey guys, I noticed that Teek's looking a little skinny. That's it. That's all I said. I noticed he's looking a little skinny. To which I was told,
you don't know what you're talking about. That horse has never looked better.
He was fat when we got him, and now he's muscled and well-toned. And anybody who knows horses can look at him and know that, no, that's not the case. So that really, really set me off. Because he's 2 hours away. I'm trusting him in your care. He's my horse. He belongs to me. And I, the owner, am coming to you saying, hey, my horse is looking a little skinny in your care. And you tell me, fuck off, you don't know what you're talking about. And that I don't know horses. I might not know horses, but I know what my horse looked like when I dropped him off, and I know what he looks like now, and he doesn't look good. Even if he was looking fine and dandy, and I truly was just oblivious and ignorant and didn't know any better, if I say jump, you need to say how fucking high. That's how shit goes, especially when you're borrowing my horse and I'm doing you a favor. But they always kept acting like, you know, they were doing me a favor by taking him off my hands because I couldn't. The barn owner numerous times threw it in my face about, well, you know, you're young and you can't pay for him, so it's just best that he stays in our care. Like, fucking excuse me? Like, I take great pride in making the dream work and making it happen for myself. So fuck you to tell me that I can't afford horses. I've been doing it just fine for many years now, honey. Fuck off. Yeah, so she constantly was throwing money in my face about, well, you can't afford it, so maybe it's just best he stays here with us. So I was like, he's too skinny. I don't like the way he's looking. And they told me, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. He's never looked better. So I let it slide, but that was the beginning of the end. They did end up changing his food and upping his feed a little. They put him on some senior grain, which is supposed to make him gain weight a little bit, and he started to gain a little bit of weight, supposedly. They would give him his grain, and they would put him out in his pasture for the day, and they would put his hay on the ground. And Teek was a finicky asshole, and if it touched the dirt at all, he wouldn't eat it. So he'd take a few bites and like move it around, but then it touched the ground, so he wouldn't touch it. So when we went out to get him eventually, he had piles and piles and piles of old hay that he wasn't going to touch, number one, because it was old, and number two, because it had touched the ground. So they're like, oh yeah, no, he's getting 6 flakes a day. And I'm like, but he's not fucking eating it. I was like, he doesn't eat it off the ground. You have to have it like in a bucket or elevated or something. Like if it's in his stall, that's fine, but if it touches the dirt or gets wet or gets dirty, he's not going to eat it. Okay, so my camera died while I was like mid-rant, but that's basically part 1. I'm back a few days later, looking real trash, no makeup, gross. So we're gonna end it there. There's a part 2, part 3, and part 4 coming. I might make a part 5 with any details that I might have missed. I might do a Q&A if anybody has any questions. Yeah, but since it sliced out randomly because the battery died, I needed to film an outro. So here we are. That's part 1. Part 2 is in the works. It should be up in a week, and I mean it this time. I know I've told people, those who've been anxiously waiting on Instagram for this to post, I'm sorry, and it'll be up on time. I promise this time. I'm dedicated to it. But that's the basic gist of how it started. You know, everything was kind of fine and dandy until this whole he's skinny thing happened. There were, as you've seen, there's a few bits and pieces that didn't really sit right with me, but I could ignore it for the most part, where telling me that he's not skinny and that I don't know what I'm talking about was the last straw, basically. And one thing I forgot to mention before is none of the barn owner's horses looked like Teak. Meaning, if he was the perfect weight and he's never been more muscular and he's never looked better in his life, why did none of the other horses look like him? All the other horses had more weight. You couldn't see their ribs. You couldn't see their hip bones. You know, they were well muscled, properly muscled. So if this horse was ideal, why did all the other horses not measure up, you know? Had to throw that in there. Part 2 is coming, and the other parts as well. I'll post 1 a week, I guess. But leave some questions down below, some questions, comments, anything like that. I'm happy to reply to them, or if you guys would like, I might even do, if there's lots of questions that don't end up getting answered in the following videos, I will happily do a Q&A, because I'm sure there's other burning questions or comments that come to the surface that don't get answered or don't get acknowledged. But yeah, we're gonna end that here, and part 2 is coming. Yeah, anyway, you'll see. But I had to come in and film an outro. It died like mid-rant, so it's just kind of awkward. I was hoping it would cut off at a good spot and I could kind of do like a to be continued like montage thing, but that didn't work out. But yeah, here's our outro. But thank you so much for watching and following along on this amazing journey. We'll see you in the next one.